I was kneeling in engine coolant, repairing a yacht worth tens of millions of dollars that I personally designed. Then, the new executive threw a wine-stained napkin directly at my face. "Clean it up, you pathetic cleaning lady," he ordered, showing off to his mistress. He thought he was bullying a nobody. He had no idea he had just signed the death warrant for his entire career. Never piss off the person who holds your source code. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Brooklyn Harrison. I am 34 years old, and I am the founder and chief engineer of Oracore Maritime, a maritime technology firm based in Miami, Florida, to the world. I am a chief executive officer, but down in the guts of a ship, I am just a mechanic who speaks the language of silicon and steel. It was a blistering Tuesday afternoon, and the Miami heat was radiating through the hull of the oceanic apex. This vessel was my absolute masterpiece, a prototype smart yacht worth tens of millions of dollars, designed to completely redefine autonomous maritime navigation. I was squeezed underneath the main bridge console, my fire-retardant coveralls plastered to my skin with sweat, engine oil, and a generous smear of thermal paste. A localized microchip coolant leak had threatened the neural processor, and I was not about to let an intern touch the proprietary hardware. I had been down there for 4 hours, inhaling the scent of ozone and copper, meticulously recalibrating the liquid cooling loop. Then, the heavy thud of designer loafers echoed on the teak deck above me. It was Julian Sterling. He was 28 years old, possessing the kind of artificially whitened smile and perfectly tousled hair that screamed social media influencer. He was exactly that until his uncle, who sat on my board of directors, strong-armed him into the newly invented role of creative director at Oracore. Julian knew absolutely nothing about maritime engineering. His entire contribution to the company consisted of drinking expensive espresso, rearranging the office furniture for better natural light, and treating my engineering staff like his personal entourage. Today, he had brought an aspiring swimsuit model aboard my prototype. I could hear the clinking of crystal glasses and his loud, performative laughter. "This whole vessel runs on my creative vision, babe," Julian lied smoothly, his voice dripping with unearned arrogance. "I told the tech geeks to streamline the aesthetic. Make it less nerdy, more sexy." I rolled my eyes in the darkness beneath the console and tightened a valve. Unfortunately, my wrench slipped, clanging loudly against the titanium bulkhead. The footsteps stopped. A shadow fell over the access panel. I slid out from under the dashboard on my mechanic creeper, blinking against the harsh sunlight. Before I could even wipe the grease from my forehead, something damp and crimson slapped directly across my right cheek. It was a crumpled linen napkin, soaked in cheap red wine. It hit my skin with a wet smack and dropped onto my chest. I looked up. Julian was glaring down at me, holding a half-empty glass of Merlot. The model beside him wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Clean it up, you pathetic cleaning lady," Julian snapped, his voice sharp and nasal. He stepped closer, deliberately invading my space, pointing a manicured finger at the deck. "Look at you. You are sweating all over the teak wood. You smell like a diesel engine. I have a highly confidential meeting with VIP investors in exactly 1 hour in the master suite, and I need this entire deck sterilized. Understand?" I sat up slowly. The thermal paste on my hands felt sticky. I looked at the wine-stained napkin in my lap, then back up at the man wearing a white linen suit and ridiculous $1,000 loafers. "Are you deaf?" Julian barked, his face flushing with the desperate need to look powerful in front of his date. "I want you down on your knees scrubbing this deck right now. If I see a single smudge of grease when my guests arrive, I will call your contracting agency and have you blacklisted from every marina in South Florida. Now move." In a cheap corporate drama, this is the exact moment the undercover boss stands up, reveals her true identity, and fires the arrogant employee on the spot. It is a satisfying trope, but it is sloppy, it is loud, and it leaves a mess. I am not a dramatic person. I am an engineer. When I find a fatal error in a system, I do not yell at the computer. I isolate the corrupted file, rewrite the code, and silently delete the threat permanently. I did not raise my voice. I did not introduce myself as the absolute authority of Oracore Maritime. Instead, I picked up the damp napkin with my grease-stained fingers. I looked Julian dead in the eye, and I smiled. It was a cold, empty, dead-eyed smile that did not reach my cheeks. "Right away, sir," I whispered softly. I stood up, stepping carefully around his pristine shoes, and walked off the bridge without looking back. My silence was not submission. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a predator locking onto its prey. The moment that napkin hit my face, Brooklyn Harrison, the creator, died. Brooklyn Harrison, the executioner, took over. Julian Sterling thought he was flexing his power over a random minimum wage worker. He had no idea. He had just handed the architect of his entire reality the motivation to tear his life apart, line by line. I retreated to the sub-basement of the Oracore headquarters. My personal laboratory was a concrete vault isolated from the main corporate network. The air down here was kept at a constant 68 degrees, smelling faintly of ionized air, ozone, and hot copper. I stripped off my ruined coveralls, washed the toxic thermal grease from my hands with industrial pumice soap, and sat down in my custom ergonomic chair. Before I built the physical hull of the oceanic apex, I built its ghost. I call it the Shadow Node. It is a clandestine monitoring and diagnostic system physically hardwired into the deepest sublayers of the yacht's architecture. It does not exist on any official schematic. It does not show up on any network packet sweep. It is my ultimate failsafe, a digital nervous system that allows me to see, hear, and feel every single vibration that happens on my vessel. I cracked my knuckles, bypassed the biometric locks on my terminal, and initiated the connection sequence. 3 ultra-high-definition monitors flared to life, illuminating the dark room with a harsh, synthetic glare. Lines of encrypted code cascaded down the center screen as I punched through the yacht's internal firewall from the inside out. I bypassed the standard security protocols, routing my connection through the climate control subnet, and tapped directly into the optical sensors and microphone arrays hidden within the lighting fixtures of the master suite. The audio feed hissed for a fraction of a second before resolving into crystal-clear digital clarity. "I am telling you, Marcus, the board of directors is eating out of the palm of my hand." Julian's voice sneered through my studio monitors. I routed the video feed next. The camera angle was top-down, looking over the lavish white leather couches of the VIP suite I was supposed to be scrubbing clean. Julian was pouring a heavy measure of scotch for a man I recognized immediately, Marcus Vance. He was the chief acquisition officer for Triton Dynamics, our largest and most aggressive corporate rival in the maritime sector. "Boardroom politics do not interest me, Julian," Marcus replied, his tone flat and unimpressed as he accepted the crystal glass. "Triton Dynamics is not paying you 7 figures for a hostile takeover. We are paying you for the neural architecture. We want the autonomous navigation algorithm. Do you have access to the Genesis AI or not?" I leaned closer to my screens, my heart rate steadying into a slow, cold rhythm. The Genesis AI was my life's work. It was a self-learning navigational matrix that could predict oceanic weather patterns, track rogue waves, and manage global maritime traffic with a 0.01% margin of error. It was worth billions of dollars. Julian chuckled, a slimy, overconfident sound that made my jaw clench. "Relax, Marcus. The cleaning lady has no idea what is happening right under her nose. I already bypassed her physical locks. Last night, I installed a military-grade hardware sniffer directly onto the primary server rack inside the captain's quarters." My blood turned to ice. A hardware sniffer. He had physically breached the mainframe. He had laid his incompetent hands on my servers. "The sniffer is dormant right now," Julian continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. but this Saturday, during the maiden voyage demonstration, the yacht's primary systems will be running at 100% capacity. The moment the vessel hits open water in the bay, I will trigger the extraction protocol from my personal laptop. The sniffer will clone the entire Genesis source code and upload it to your secure offshore server via a masked satellite uplink. It will take less than 5 minutes. "And what about Brooklyn Harrison?" Marcus asked, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. "She is an absolute fanatic about her code. The moment she detects the data bleed, she will sever the connection and lock down the entire network." Julian smiled, taking a slow, arrogant sip of his drink. "That is the best part of the plan. I had a shadow team on the dark web write a vicious logic bomb. The moment your upload completes, my payload will execute automatically. It will fracture the yacht's internal firewalls and dump terabytes of corrupted, sensitive client data into the public domain. It will look exactly like a catastrophic failure of Brooklyn's own security architecture. A massive breach of international maritime privacy protocols." Marcus raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "The Federal Trade Commission will crucify her for a breach of that magnitude. It is severe corporate negligence." "Negligence?" Julian laughed out loud, throwing his head back. "Try corporate espionage. I planted a series of dummy emails on her private server. The feds will think she deliberately sold the data to a foreign entity and botched the cover-up. She will not just lose the company, she is going to spend the next 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. By the time the dust settles, I will step up as the heroic interim CEO who saves Oracore from absolute ruin. And Triton Dynamics gets the most advanced artificial intelligence on the planet. Everyone wins, except the mechanic, of course." The audio feed fell silent as the two men clinked their glasses together, a chilling toast to my complete and utter destruction. I sat back in my chair. The monitors cast a pale blue glow across my face, reflecting in my eyes. My breathing was slow, deep, and perfectly measured. Julian Sterling was not just a nepotism hire with a fragile ego and a bad attitude. He was a corporate parasite actively trying to steal my legacy and lock me in a cage for 2 decades. The sheer audacity of his plan was almost impressive. He had weaponized his own perceived incompetence to fly completely under my radar. The logical response, the legally sound response, would be to compile this audio and video recording, march down to the docks, rip the hardware sniffer out of the server rack, and hand the entire neat package over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They would arrest Julian before he even finished his expensive scotch. It would be a safe, clean, and clinical victory. But it would be incredibly boring. More importantly, an arrest would just be a temporary inconvenience for a man insulated by his family's vast wealth. His uncle would hire a team of the most expensive corporate defense lawyers in the country. They would argue entrapment, or claim the audio recordings were deepfakes fabricated using artificial intelligence. He might get a slap on the wrist, a quiet, face-saving resignation, and a soft landing at another luxury tech firm within 6 months. No, the standard justice system was far too fragile for a parasite like Julian. If he wanted to play God with my systems, if he wanted to use my life's work as a bargaining chip to buy his way into the billionaires' club while tossing me to the wolves, I was going to give him exactly what he wanted. I was going to let him throw his grand, glittering party. I was going to let him stand on the pristine deck of my ship, in front of the world's most powerful investors and the flashing cameras of the press, and press the button to steal my code. I reached for my mechanical keyboard. The satisfying click of the keys echoed in the quiet vault. I did not need the police to protect my creation. I had root access. "You want a spectacular show. Julian," I whispered to the empty humming room, bringing up the master command console for the oceanic apex. "Let us write you a tragedy." For the next 72 hours, the sub-basement of the Oracore headquarters became my entire universe. I did not sleep. I consumed nothing but cold black coffee and chalky protein bars. The harsh synthetic blue light of my 3 ultra-high-definition monitors burned into my retinas, leaving floating purple shadows in my vision every time I blinked. But my mind had never been sharper. I was operating in a state of absolute, crystalline focus. I was not just writing code, I was crafting a digital labyrinth, a trap so perfectly integrated into the yacht's architecture that it would be completely indistinguishable from the core operating system until the exact millisecond the jaws snapped shut. My first and most critical objective was the Genesis artificial intelligence itself. Julian thought his illicit hardware sniffer was perfectly positioned to siphon the most valuable neural network in the world. He was right about the physical location, but he was catastrophically wrong about the payload. Working line by line, I carefully extracted the actual multi-billion-dollar Genesis source code from the yacht. I encrypted it behind 24 layers of biometric security and migrated it entirely to an isolated, air-gapped server bolted securely to the concrete floor beneath my desk. In its place on the yacht's primary server rack, I constructed a phantom. This decoy looked absolutely identical to the Genesis matrix. It possessed the exact same complex file structures, the same simulated neural weight distribution, and the exact same massive byte size, but it was a hollow, poisonous shell, filled to the brim with a hyper-aggressive, custom-built, self-replicating ransomware worm. I engineered this malicious software to be a patient predator. It was specifically designed to remain completely dormant while being downloaded by the sniffer. It would not trigger a single antivirus alarm, but the absolute second it detected that it had been fully transferred to a foreign device, it would violently wake up. It would not just lock the stolen files. It would aggressively infect Julian's host machine, devouring every piece of personal, financial, and corporate data it could find. It would bypass his cloud backups, encrypt his entire digital existence, and permanently fry his hardware from the inside out. I named the executable file Pandora. It was a terrifyingly beautiful piece of digital destruction, patiently waiting in the dark. But simply ruining Julian's computer and embarrassing his offshore buyer at Triton Dynamics was not enough. That was too quiet. I needed him to suffer publicly, in the exact same way he intended to humiliate me. I needed to trap him in a cage of his own making, in front of the people he desperately wanted to impress. That required activating the threat quarantine protocol. When I originally designed the physical hull of the oceanic apex, I anticipated the very real threat of high-seas piracy. Nobody spends tens of millions of dollars on a state-of-the-art smart yacht without requiring absolute, uncompromising physical security. The protocol was a military-grade lockdown feature hidden so deep in the technical appendices of the user manual that I knew for a documented fact Julian had never bothered to read it. By meticulously tweaking a few hundred lines of base code, I completely rewired the protocol's trigger mechanism. Instead of activating via a manual panic button on the bridge, I tethered it directly to the data port where Julian had plugged in his hardware sniffer. The moment the unauthorized data extraction reached exactly 99%, the yacht would react as if it were under hostile, armed siege. The massive diesel engines would instantly cut out. The smart glass surrounding the captain's quarters would instantly polarize, shifting from transparent to opaque black, before locking back to crystal clear but becoming completely unbreakable and soundproof. Magnetic door locks, capable of withstanding thousands of pounds of sheer force, would seal every exit. Julian would be locked inside a reinforced, air-conditioned glass terrarium, perfectly visible to his guests, entirely helpless, and entirely at my mercy. While the invisible snare was being set in the dark vault, I had to maintain the flawless illusion of submission in the light. Over the course of those 3 days, I attended 4 mandatory board meetings via video conference. I played my part perfectly. I deliberately adjusted the angle of my webcam to highlight the dark, heavy circles under my eyes. I wore a faded, oversized gray sweater. I kept my posture slumped, my shoulders rounded, and my voice quiet, embodying the exact pathetic image of the defeated, exhausted engineer that Julian wanted me to be. Brooklyn, I trust the climate control issues in the VIP suite have been completely resolved, Julian asked during our Thursday morning executive sync. His perfectly tanned face took up my entire screen. He was sitting in a plush leather chair in his corner office, a smug, victorious grin plastered across his face. "Yes, Julian," I mumbled, keeping my eyes cast down toward my keyboard. "The leaks are patched. The deck is spotless." "Excellent," he replied, his voice dripping with heavy condescension. "Make sure you stay out of sight during the maiden voyage this Saturday. We have Tier 1 technology press and highly influential, high-net-worth individuals coming aboard. I do not want any grease stains or sweaty mechanics ruining the aesthetic. Is that understood?" "Understood," I whispered meekly. I muted my microphone and went back to compiling his digital guillotine. His sheer, unadulterated arrogance was the final, necessary ingredient my algorithm needed. He was so completely blinded by his own perceived superiority that he never bothered to check the daily system logs. He never noticed the massive firewall reconfigurations happening right beneath his expensive leather shoes. On Friday evening, exactly 12 hours before the launch event, I walked out of the corporate headquarters and down to the marina. The oceanic apex was illuminated by underwater LED lights, glowing like a massive, floating sapphire in the dark water of the bay. Catering crews were already setting up elaborate champagne pyramids on the aft deck, and audio technicians were running heavy bass sound checks for the DJ booth. I slipped past the private security detail with a simple nod, as they all knew the face of the chief engineer, and made my way up the winding stairs to the bridge. The captain's quarters were pristine, smelling of expensive polish and fresh leather. The servers hummed quietly behind their smoked glass enclosures. Julian had already set up his personal control desk, a sleek mahogany table overlooking the water, complete with a silver nameplate bearing his title. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out a crisp, white linen napkin. It was brand new, perfectly ironed, and completely clean. I folded it with slow, meticulous precision, pressing the edges until it formed a sharp, perfect geometric square. I walked over to Julian's desk and placed the folded napkin directly in the dead center of his leather blotting pad. It was a quiet greeting, a silent nod from the cleaning lady he had so casually insulted, a physical marker of the invisible snare that now surrounded his every move. I knew he would ignore it. He would probably just brush it onto the floor, too busy being important to register the warning staring him right in the face. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the waves against the titanium hull. The trap was primed, the code was compiled, the digital noose was tied. All I had to do now was wait for the rat to confidently march forward and take the cheese. I turned my back on the bridge, stepped off the yacht, and disappeared into the warm, humid Miami night. Saturday afternoon in Miami was a masterclass in aggressive, unfiltered vanity. The sun beat down on the Biscayne Bay Marina, reflecting off the blindingly white titanium hull of the oceanic apex. The guest list was a chaotic, carefully curated mix of Silicon Valley venture capitalists pretending to like the ocean, local real estate moguls draped in wives who were exactly half their age, and a swarm of social media influencers desperate for high-engagement content. It was a circus of fake tans, rented diamonds, and empty conversations about synergistic paradigms, blockchain integration, and disruptive technologies. Waiters in crisp black uniforms circulated with silver platters of caviar blinis and glasses of champagne that cost more than my first car. I was sitting right in the middle of it all, perched on a plush velvet stool in the VIP cabana area. I had shed the grease-stained coveralls and the tired, defeated posture of the sub-basement mechanic. Instead, I wore a custom-tailored, crimson silk slip dress that caught the warm ocean breeze. My hair was professionally blown out, framing my face behind a pair of oversized, dark Tom Ford sunglasses. I held a crystal glass containing a perfectly chilled gin martini, complete with 3 olives on a silver pick. I looked like just another bored venture capitalist heiress or a high-end art dealer. The beautiful irony of the ultra-rich is that they never actually look at faces. They only look at price tags and brand names. As long as I wore the right fabric and held the right drink, I was completely invisible to them. A heavy rhythmic bass line thumped through the yacht's hidden speaker system, rattling the ice in my glass. The crowd quieted down as the massive high-definition LED screens on the aft deck flickered to life. Julian Sterling stepped out onto the raised acrylic podium. He was wearing an absolutely absurd, pristine white linen suit with no tie, looking less like a technology executive and more like a cult leader for a multi-level marketing scheme. The crowd politely applauded. "Welcome, everyone, to the absolute pinnacle of luxury and innovation." Julian projected into a sleek microphone, flashing his chemically whitened smile. For too long, the maritime industry has been held back by outdated, rigid engineering mindsets. People who care more about bolts and wires than the actual user experience. People who lack vision. But today, Aurocor Maritime enters a brand new era, an era of limitless creativity, led by visionary design. He paused for dramatic effect, soaking in the camera flashes from the eager press corps. The oceanic apex is not just a boat, it is a floating, autonomous intelligence, he continued, smoothly claiming ownership of my sleepless nights, my ruined relationships, and my bleeding hands. I have personally overseen the complete overhaul of this vessel's neural matrix. We have trimmed the fat. We have eliminated the dead weight holding us back. We are moving forward into a future where the machine serves the aesthetic, not the other way around. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my martini, trimmed the fat, eliminated the dead weight. It was a poorly disguised, public declaration of his intent to terminate my employment the moment this weekend was over. I felt a brief, razor-sharp spike of adrenaline, but I forced my heart rate to remain steady. Let him have his applause. Let him soak in the adulation. The higher he climbed the pedestal, the more shattered his legs would be when he hit the concrete. Someone popped a massive, oversized bottle of vintage champagne, sending a geyser of foam into the air. The crowd cheered loudly. Deep beneath our feet, the massive, silent electric turbines of the oceanic apex engaged. The yacht smoothly detached from the mooring lines and began to glide out of the marina, slicing through the turquoise water toward the open expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The party instantly shifted into high gear. Waiters carrying silver trays of Wagyu beef sliders navigated through the dense, dancing crowd. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the expensive teak deck. It was the perfect picture of untouchable success. I watched Julian step down from the podium. He shook a few hands, posed for a dozen selfies with people he clearly despised, and then subtly checked his heavy gold wristwatch. He caught the eye of Marcus Vance, the executive from Triton Dynamics, who was standing near the starboard railing holding a glass of scotch. They exchanged a brief, almost imperceptible nod. The buyer was ready. Julian smoothly detached himself from the crowd of sycophants. He slipped past the heavy security doors that separated the party zone from the operational sections of the vessel. He was heading for the bridge. He was heading for the captain's quarters. I set my empty martini glass down on a nearby silver table. I leaned back into the velvet cushions and crossed my legs. The bass of the electronic dance music was vibrating right through my chest, masking the sudden, terrifying silence in my own mind. There was no more coding to do. There were no more board meetings to fake. The trap was laid, and the prey was walking willingly into the cage. 5 minutes passed. The yacht cleared the breakwater, hitting the deeper, choppier currents of the ocean. Then, my left wrist vibrated. It was a single, sharp pulse from my smartwatch. I slowly raised my arm and pushed my sunglasses down the bridge of my nose to look at the custom interface. The screen flashed with a bright, solid crimson alert. The text on the tiny screen read, "Unauthorized data extraction initiated. Port Terminal 4 engaged." He had done it. Julian had physically plugged his laptop into the compromised server rack. He had bypassed the dummy physical locks I had left for him and initiated the transfer. He thought he was downloading a billion-dollar artificial intelligence. He was actually downloading Pandora. I slowly pushed my sunglasses back up. A genuine, terrifying smile spread across my face. The game had officially begun. I kept my eyes locked on the tiny, glowing face of my smartwatch. The progress bar for the unauthorized data extraction was climbing with agonizing slowness. 10%, 35%, 60%. The heavy thumping bass of the electronic dance music around me seemed to sync perfectly with my heartbeat. Waiters continued to pour champagne. Influencers continued to pose against the railings. No one had the slightest clue that a multi-million-dollar corporate assassination was taking place right above their heads. 85%, 90%. I slipped my hand into my custom silk clutch and pulled out my personal smartphone. I bypassed the biometric lock and opened a single, completely blank application. There was no interface, no menus, just a single red circle in the center of the dark screen. 98%. 99%. I pressed the red circle. The response was instantaneous and violent. The massive concert-grade speakers surrounding the aft deck did not just fade out. They died with a sharp, ear-splitting crack of static that made half the guests scream and drop their crystal glasses. The sudden, deafening silence that followed was heavy and unnatural, broken only by the sound of the ocean wind and the confused murmurs of the elite crowd. Before anyone could ask what had happened, the entire titanium hull of the oceanic apex violently shuddered. The massive electric turbines deep below the waterline cut thrust completely. Then came the terrifying, mechanical roar of the emergency drop anchors. Twin pillars of solid steel and heavy iron chains plummeted from the bow, tearing into the ocean floor. The sudden deceleration threw people off balance. Venture capitalists tumbled into waiters, and plates of expensive caviar crashed onto the pristine teak deck. The yacht groaned, settling heavily into the water, dead in the water in the middle of Biscayne Bay. Up on the bridge, the threat quarantine protocol engaged exactly as I had coded it. I looked up just in time to see the floor-to-ceiling smart glass panels surrounding the captain's quarters undergo their transformation. In a fraction of a second, the transparent glass polarized, snapping into a solid, impenetrable sheet of pitch black, before instantly reversing back to crystal clear. That rapid polarization cycle was the visual confirmation. The magnetic locks, rated to withstand 5,000 pounds of sheer kinetic force, slammed shut with a heavy, resonating boom that echoed across the entire vessel. The bridge was completely sealed. Inside that glass box, the real horror show for Julian Sterling was just beginning. Down in the hidden servers, the extraction reached 100%. Julian thought he had just successfully downloaded the Genesis artificial intelligence. Instead, Pandora woke up. The custom ransomware did not just delete his copied files. It was an apex predator released into a confined digital ecosystem. Within the first 3 seconds, it completely incinerated the hard drive of his sniffer device. Then, using the active physical connection he had so generously provided, Pandora crawled straight up the cable and into his personal, custom-built laptop. It bypassed his commercial antivirus software as if it were made of wet paper. It locked his hard drive, encrypted his operating system, and began systematically eating its way through his life. But I had not designed Pandora to stop there. Utilizing his laptop's active wireless connections, the worm leaped into his smartphone sitting on the desk next to him. It accessed his stored passwords and immediately hijacked his cloud accounts. In less than 30 seconds, Julian's entire digital existence was systematically dismantled. His offshore bank access, his cryptocurrency wallets, his private emails, his contacts, his social media empires, all of it was locked behind a complex military encryption key that literally did not exist. I had programmed the malware to destroy its own decryption algorithm the moment the infection was complete. He was digitally erased. Down on the deck, the confused murmurs of the crowd were turning into genuine panic. People were pulling out their phones, frantically trying to find a cell signal to call for help, only to realize the yacht's localized signal jammers had also been activated. Then, the massive LED screens towering over the dance floor violently flickered back to life. They did not display the Oracore corporate logo or the abstract, swirling art Julian had commissioned. Instead, the screens blazed with the crisp, unforgiving clarity of the bridge's hidden security feeds. The first image broadcast to the hundreds of guests and the eager technology press was a live feed of Julian himself, trapped inside the captain's quarters. He was frantically mashing the keyboard of his laptop, his face pale and contorted in sheer terror as he watched his screen melt into a sea of red error warnings. Before the crowd could fully process why the guest of honor was locked in a glass box, the screen split. The left side maintained the live feed of his panic, while the right side began aggressively cycling through a carefully curated presentation of absolute damnation. First came the text messages, massive, high-definition screenshots of Julian's encrypted conversations with Marcus Vance from Triton Dynamics. The words were 10 feet tall, impossible to miss. Triton Dynamics is not paying you 7 figures for a hostile takeover. Marcus had written. Julian's arrogant response sat right below it. I installed a military-grade hardware sniffer. I will step up as the heroic interim CEO. I watched Marcus Vance out of the corner of my eye. The arrogant acquisition officer dropped his glass of scotch. It shattered on the deck. The color drained completely from his face as the surrounding venture capitalists stepped away from him, instantly recognizing they were standing next to a dead man walking. Next, the screens displayed Julian's forged financial ledgers. Columns of fabricated expenses, ghost contractors, and embezzled corporate funds were laid bare for every major investor on board to see. The numbers highlighted his exact, methodical theft from the very company he claimed to be saving. But the grand finale was the audio. The yacht's massive concert speakers roared back to life, but this time, they were not playing electronic dance music. They were playing the crystal-clear recording from the sub-basement surveillance feed, perfectly synced with the video from the day before. Julian's sneering voice, amplified to rock concert decibels, echoed across the open ocean. Clean it up, you pathetic cleaning lady. I want you down on your knees scrubbing this deck right now. The entire crowd gasped in collective, horrified unison. The press corps, realizing they were witnessing the greatest corporate meltdown of the decade, scrambled to point their heavy professional cameras at the LED screens and then up at the glass bridge. Inside the captain's quarters, Julian finally looked down. Through the reinforced glass, he saw the massive screens. He saw his own text messages. He heard his own cruel, nasal voice blasting across the bay. He saw the dozens of camera lenses pointed directly at his face. The reality of his situation crashed down on him with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. The pristine white linen suit suddenly looked like a straitjacket. He lunged at the heavy door, slamming his fists against the unbreakable smart glass, his mouth opening in a silent, desperate scream that nobody could hear. He was a rat in a perfectly sealed, perfectly transparent trap. The chaos on the deck was absolute. Investors were shouting. Influencers were live-streaming the screens, their follower counts skyrocketing as they broadcast the destruction of Julian Sterling to the entire world. Security guards were helplessly pulling at the locked doors leading to the lower decks, completely locked out of the system. It was time. I stood up from the velvet cabana chair. I reached up and slowly removed my oversized Tom Ford sunglasses, sliding them into my clutch. I smoothed the fabric of my crimson silk dress and began to walk. I did not rush. I walked with the slow, measured, and absolute authority of a god walking through her own temple. The crowd, frantic and screaming just seconds before, began to part around me. The venture capitalists who had ignored me moments ago now stared in absolute shock. The press lowered their cameras slightly, their lenses tracking my movement as I ascended the short stairs to the acrylic podium Julian had occupied just 20 minutes earlier. I stepped up to the microphone. The live feed of Julian frantically beating his bleeding knuckles against the glass loomed massive on the screen behind me. I tapped the microphone once. The sharp, piercing feedback instantly silenced the remaining screams on the deck. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me. The execution was complete. It was time for the verdict. "Good afternoon," I said, my voice projecting crisp and clear through the yacht's restored public address system. The sheer authority in my tone anchored the frantic crowd. "For those of you who only pay attention to the names printed on your catering menus, Allow me to formally introduce myself. My name is Brooklyn Harrison. I am the founder, the chief executive officer, and the sole chief engineer of Oracore Maritime. A collective gasp rippled through the venture capitalists and media personnel. Dozens of camera lenses immediately refocused on my face. Please do not be alarmed, I continued smoothly, gesturing toward the massive LED screens broadcasting Julian's utter humiliation. What you are witnessing is not a malfunction. It is a live, completely unscripted demonstration of our proprietary threat quarantine protocol. The Oceanic Apex recently detected an amateur, internal attempt to steal multi-billion-dollar corporate assets. The artificial intelligence automatically identified the threat, isolated the compromised hardware, and successfully neutralized the hostile actor. Your investments are perfectly secure. Right on cue, the heavy rhythmic thumping of helicopter rotors broke through the ocean breeze, accompanied by the piercing wail of maritime sirens. Two heavily armored United States Coast Guard interceptor vessels tore through the bay. Flanking the immobilized super yacht, I had hard-coded an automated federal distress beacon into the ransomware's payload. The exact second Julian's laptop initiated the theft, the system dispatched a complete encrypted dossier of his financial crimes and espionage directly to the federal authorities. Armed officers swiftly boarded the deck. I tapped a single command on my smartwatch. Up on the bridge, the magnetic locks securing the captain's quarters released with a loud hiss. The officers breached the room in a highly coordinated sweep. Julian did not even attempt to resist. They slammed him face down onto his pristine mahogany desk, securing his hands behind his back with heavy steel cuffs. The charge was severe: premeditated economic espionage, a federal crime carrying a minimum sentence of 20 years. They marched him down the winding acrylic staircase to the main deck, right through the parted sea of his former elite admirers. Julian's expensive white linen suit was wrinkled and soaked with terrified sweat. He looked completely shattered. As the officers dragged him past the podium, he locked eyes with me. His arrogant facade had entirely evaporated, replaced by the pathetic, weeping face of a ruined little boy. He silently mouthed a desperate plea for help. I stepped down from the podium and walked until I was standing just inches away from him. I looked at his red, tear-streaked face. "The clean napkin is on the desk," I whispered, my voice colder than the ocean below us. "Dry your tears." The officers pulled him away, hauling him onto the tactical vessel. I watched without a single shred of pity as the boat sped back toward the Miami coastline, taking his entire future with it. The fallout was rapid and absolute. By the time the stock market opened the following Monday morning, shares of Oracore Maritime had surged by 42%. The financial world was mesmerized by the flawless, brutal efficiency of our security infrastructure. Julian's uncle, along with 3 other corrupt board members who had orchestrated my attempted ousting, quietly submitted their unconditional resignations within 24 hours to avoid federal conspiracy indictments. I was sitting behind the massive glass desk in my corner office, looking out over the endless blue expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The corporate hierarchy had been violently corrected. In the world of technology, people often confuse volume with authority. They believe that power belongs to the person wearing the most expensive designer labels, commanding the largest boardrooms, and screaming the loudest demands. But they are entirely wrong. True power is completely silent. True power belongs to the person who controls the architecture of reality. The master of the universe is not the man giving the orders. It is the woman who can permanently shut down that man's entire life with a single line of code. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Boss Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.